Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to Zeitz MOCAA's online conversation, which is titled Arts, Resistance, Civic Engagement, and the Formulation of Public Space. It's a wordy title, but a meaty one, and I'm joined by three really wonderful individuals, Mabel Mnensa, Citas, and Bushy Wopp, who's going to be sharing some thoughts and ideas with me. I'm very excited that you guys are here, and thank you so much for meeting here tonight to talk. We have lots to talk about and some rich content ahead of us, so thank you so much for sharing so generously with us. Also to our audience and kind of joining us tonight, thank you so much. A little bit of context is that this panel discussion is part of a series that we've initiated specifically around the exhibition Home is Where the Art Is, that's currently on view at Zeitz MOCAA. We're going into the last couple of weeks of the exhibition. It's almost a year that the exhibition is on. It's been an extraordinary journey for the museum. We've learned a lot. We've also had to unlearn a lot in the process, and it's been an incredibly rich experience. And so, yeah, thank you for being part of this journey. Two of our panelists are exhibitors on the exhibition. So thank you so much for also having faith in us in this crazy call for us of Cape Townians to bring their artworks to the museum. We really appreciate that gesture. And also for us, we got to know you because of your participation in the show. And so thank you for being on this platform with us and sharing again. I would like to just very briefly introduce the panelists here with me tonight. First off, it's Mabel Menensa, who is an author, poet, and once was a marketing manager. She's also an English literature research master's graduate with a media, communications, and culture degree. For the longest time, she ignored her creative side, thinking corporate was the way to go. But in 2017, after the writing bug refused to be ignored any further, she picked up the pen again and dared to start writing. Since then, her debut children's picture book, Cantiga Finds the Perfect Name, was published by Jacana, and she has worked on various other children's stories with Book Dash and Nal Ibali. In 2020, her short story, Josie's Calling, was published in the award-winning anthology Joe Book Noir, and another story, What the Body Does Not Forget, was included in the Women's Month edition of the Mbiza Journal for African Writing in September 2021. A lover of trivia and finding innovative ways of sharing knowledge, she is currently in the process of distributing a Pan-African Mzansi board game, Half Tiger, that she has spent the last 2 years testing and tweaking. A warm welcome to you, Mabel. Then I have with us Citas, somebody that I know maybe the longest on the panel. We've known each other since Rika was a kid. Durban days, long time ago. So Rika, thank you for joining us and nice to be in this forum with you. Rika straddles a number of disciplines and practices and come to urban studies via history, political studies, sociology, cultural geography, visual arts, and architecture and planning. So I know Rika as an artist, and I think I worked with her in collaboration with her partner, Henning, on the first solo exhibition in Durban a long time ago. Rika has been based at the African Centre for Cities at the University of Cape Town since 2011, and her research is focused on the role of arts, culture, and heritage in exploring the power of place and reorienting priorities in the city, how serious fun can create less threatening spaces for understanding critical urban issues, how arts and humanities-based methods can reveal why do we disagree about resilience, the role of fiction and film in urban lives, how cultural mapping and planning can contribute to urban sustainability and justice, and asking whose heritage matters. Prior to joining the African Centre for Cities, she was actively involved in the art sector in Durban and co-founded public art architecture organization DALA. She has worked with the Institute of Creative Arts and is a writing fellow as part of the Restless Infections. She's also a Centre for Humanities Research Fellow, where she's in the process of initiating collaborations around the idea of the urban humanities. Welcome, Rika. Fantastic to have you here. Then joined by Bushy Wopp, who came into the museum with some colleagues and friends and collaborators, I guess, and spray painted some stuff on the museum wall. We'll show you about that. It's really fantastic. I overheard you guys saying that it's a great to have a billboard in the Zeitz MOCAA for your project. So really appreciate that attitude as well, taking the opportunity. But Bushy is a South African illustrator and mural artist. He has worked with many international brands, including Fila, Reebok, New Balance, Universal Studios, Amazon, and is currently a Jägermeister Meister. Welcome. He collaborated with local brands like Shelf Life, Archive, The Fix, and Sneaker Lab. Having exhibited in numerous galleries like World Art and Art Bureau Collective, he had his first solo show at Uncle's Art Dealers in October 2020. The said billboard that you put in Zeitz MOCAA. Welcome to you as well, Bushy. So a little bit of context. Just want to ask Tiffany Andrews, who's behind the scenes as our host here, to start the slides for us. The context here, a home is where the art is, a wonderful kind of engagement by Cape Town Public, over 1,800 participants in the project. Next slide, please. The exhibition has been organized in kind of 5 themes, and I think that one of the thematics that we're unpacking today is with what we called outside within the exhibition, and outside, broadly speaking, as that space, firstly, outside of ourselves, and where the encounter happens then with others. Outside is also a place that is really a space that also is challenged. It's not necessarily always safe. It's also a space for politics and contestation. It also kind of is a place filled with all kinds of histories that kind of cross-section here. And this is an installation view from one of the exhibition, from one of the rooms in the exhibition on outside, and a wonderful work here that became the banner for this talk as well, Colonial Mentality, that Mabel had a hand in making, and she'll talk about this also a little bit more. It's been one of the key works, actually, I think, that has stood out for us when those entries came in as well. A kind of a spray paint on a found picture that looks like a colonial picture. Next slide, Tiffany, thank you. And then an installation view for Uncles, where Bushy had a hand in, also in the outside section. I'm going to first ask each panelist to give us a short introduction about themselves, their own practice, and also thinking about how it relates to the theme, especially from thinking about urban context. Each one of you have really worked consistently and for a long period of time thinking about this from various directions. And we're just very curious to hear how you see the world and how you see the city and the actions that is needed to make it a better space. So over to you, Rika, as our first respondent.
Thanks, Storm. It's really good to be able to take part in these conversations. It feels a little bit strange for them to be on Zoom and not to be in the space itself. But let me just start with, I'm going to make 5 brief comments, something about myself, something about art, something about public space and cities, something about publicness, and something about resistance, responding to the theme of the discussion. And as Storm was listing all of these various different disciplines I came through, when I was turned 1, my parents were given this image of a cat who wants to be a dog. And it kind of became quite prophetic in some ways. So my disciplinary background is somewhat undisciplined. When I was a political scientist and historian in undergrad, I wanted to be a sociologist. When I was a sociologist in postgrad, I wanted to be an artist, which is kind of where I met Storm. And then when I was doing fine art and a master's, I wanted to be a geographer. And although I wanted to be a human geographer, my PhD, I ended up with a doctorate in architecture and planning, and can't even draw a kid's drawing of a house, let alone plans for where streetlights should go or any of the other things that urban planners do. So after spending some time in the art world in Durban and starting the arts organization that Storm mentioned, I thought it would be cool to try and apply what I'd been doing in practice to academia. And somehow through all of this, I landed at the African Center for Cities, which thankfully allows me to be all of these crazy things sometimes at the same time. And for the last 2 years, I've been a fellow at the Center for Humanities Research, trying to pull this together, pull a kind of interdisciplinary practice thinking space together. Next slide, please. So in the art practice, and especially in the public arts organization, we were particularly interested in unpacking and using art as a tactic for identifying ways of seeing, ways of knowing, and particularly ways of acting in cities. And when we talk about cities, not just in terms of public space, but cities are always public and private, they're interior and exterior. So this blurring of boundaries has always been very interesting to us as a group. But for me, straddling the practice of being an artist and being an academic is how art is in itself a form of knowledge production. It's not only about theorizing about art, that art actually theorizes in itself. And so one very kind of obvious example in some ways is how novels may help us know cities more than any academic article or technical surveys. So I'm very interested in what art renders visible, so in cities, and what is rendered recognizable, which I think resonates a lot with what my co-panelists are about in terms of murals and graffiti and in terms of various forms of writing. When we find registers that are familiar. Next slide, please. So we recognize this of our cities, that we have these spatial divisions from apartheid and colonialism that put people side by side in this very stark way. We have infrastructural barriers that cut our cities into various quadrants that are very, very stubborn and very difficult to maneuver around or to change. Next slide, please. And we have this reality of also lingering colonialism and new forms of encroachment into what this piece says on the Leesbeck, same colonizers, different ships. So we're sitting in this history, which I think also resonates with the image storm that is being used as the poster for this. And so one of the things I really believe is that public spaces are not empty vessels or just stages for human action. They exert a force. We know when we are and when we aren't welcome. And so it should be unsurprising in many ways that the power dynamics that play out everywhere in society will also play out in public space. And so what does this mean for the romantic notion of public spaces, which should be for everybody and about everybody? Next slide, please. Which makes us have to think a lot about what this public is that we're talking about. The public is a very broad category. And so what does publicness mean in relation to art? In whose service is art? This is a quote from an exhibition, sort of critiquing some of this very narrow and problematic framing sometimes of what it means to do civic engagement. And what happens when there's research and representation fatigue. So linking to the next slide, which is what does democratizing art mean? Which I think I'm really looking forward to having the conversation about it. What does it mean to include and amplify different voices, which is why we're here. And so what does it mean to reorient, redistribute, and all the different re's that we need to do? So, and last slide, please. And so what does this mean in terms of resistance? So justice requires reckonings, redress, redistributions, and various forms of repair, but resistance comes in different forms. And so protests can be making a big announcement, but what are the small incremental encroachments, the quieter steps that art does, especially in marking the city in different ways? Let me leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you, Rika, for kicking off with force here and a very cogent kind of start to this. I've really got a couple of questions, and I think thank you for also giving some leads into the further discussion. And I think that is a good moment to hand over to Mabel. Your turn. So thank you.
Thank you so much. So as your intro says, I am a writer. So right now, when I'm talking, I'm actually coming to you from Dublin because I'm actually doing my master's in creative writing, just like an opportunity for me to focus on my writing. And weirdly enough, I had my first lecture on Monday, and the theme there was about writing and place. And just place is very important. And I think coming to this, the city, and I actually never realized how central place was in my writing. I think I'll go into it a bit further. So just to start about this piece of work that we submitted. So Colonial Mentality. So basically, I bought a place in the storeroom. I found this piece of work and I was wondering if it was worth anything. And looking at it, my sister's like, no, it's not. This is a replica. So I'm like, okay, so what am I going to do with it? Maybe I can do something with the frame. And we thought, it looks like a Spanish city. And you can imagine in someone's house. And we really believe in reimagining ways of being. That's quite important to me. And so I did this with Lidudu Malingani, who is also a writer and a script writer. And I'll go in a bit further about the work he does. So what we wanted was like for us to start talking back to the art that we take for granted, like this piece of work, like, just there, we just thought we're gonna talk back. Colonial Mentality is speaking to Fela Kuti's song because we believe that we believe art is a great catalyst for change. And what I really feel important about this exhibition, this home is where the art is, I think it's innovative. I really applaud it. And I think when you talk about democratizing the space, I really feel like it's the first step to that. And making art accessible, because also what I have seen is that in many instances, we as Africans don't get the opportunity to define what art means to us. So now this is giving us an opportunity to be like, these things in my house that I think is art. Most of the time, as before, like when you talk about Picasso and Dada, as Rika had said, they took our stuff and then they said, okay, this is art. And they took things that were valuable to us, or maybe just everyday things, and then they were like, this is art. So this is why I think this was such an important project. And also for us to look at the relationships we have with the city. If you can please go to the next slide. Also, yeah, just to say, also in the previous one, what was also very important was the fact that I took my niece and nephew there for the exhibition, and for them to be in that space. So already now there's sort of a barrier that's being broken. They are seeing themselves in spaces like these, and they've already started painting now. I'm like, they're always painting, and like, maybe it's going to go into a gallery or in a museum. I'm like, that's a great attitude to have. So Lidudu Malingani, who we worked on that piece together, he's the founding editor of Inner City. And this is a blog that he started on Medium, and he gets contributions from people all over the continent. And what he saw this blog as being is to archive a narrative about African cities that feels African. So he felt like there were many pieces being written in different spaces about what Africa is, or what an African city is, and that weren't really particularly written by Africans. So he just wanted to take the narrative back and sort of like an archive. And so I think that's also a start. And if you can go to the next slide, please. So then when I'm talking about place and writing, so I fortunately, there was a call for stories based in Johannesburg. So I am from Johannesburg. And I think this scorpion and this stinging, it goes back. So Joburg is seen as this dangerous place. It's a dangerous city and it's so loaded. I mean, Cape Town on the other, everyone sees as this European city. I mean, it's quite interesting how cities are seen. And even with all its beauty, I thought that I would be writing more about Cape Town, but I find myself, even though I left Johannesburg 2001, I keep going back to it. And so Josie's Calling is a story that I wrote, and it's based in Berea. And I just got this quote that I included here is because this is how I feel like about Johannesburg. There are some parts of it that are scary, or maybe people might feel they're alienating or dangerous. But for me, and also with my complicated lineage where I've got a family who's rooted in Malawi, and many people like me, we actually find peace there. It feels like home. And I know that home is where the art is. I can just go to the next slide, please. Okay, so, and then the next story is What the Body Does Not Forget. So this was in an anthology in Imbiza. And also this story, again, is based in Joburg. So what's interesting in these two stories and my choice is that the previous story is based in the past, and this one is based in the future. But even still in this future, women are still seen as objects, and then there's graffiti, and only graffiti in the bad parts of town. And I feel like graffiti sometimes serves as a way for people to speak to the city, like to have that dialogue, because before it's just like, this is the city, you're going to stay in it and that's it. You can't really engage with it. But these are people leaving their mark. And yeah, so I think that's key things I want to talk about right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mabel, and also an interesting for us to also bring into the conversation through the exhibition writers like yourself. And thank you also for sharing and kind of the shout out to others that were part of this journey. And also kind of, you know, I loved what Rika said earlier about like how we understand cities through novels better than other ways, and so and markers. And I think it would be lovely to discuss that also further. So thank you for this wonderful introduction to yourself. And then I'm going to now, good point also to segue to Bushy. Over to you for your introduction.
Hi guys, I'm Bushy and I'm a mural artist and illustrator. Also, I do community development, and it's a funny story how we got involved with the Zeitz, with homies where the art is. And for a long time, graffiti or mural art hasn't really been seen by such prestigious galleries and places like the Zeitz. So when homies with the artists happened, we were like, hey, why don't we just paint? Why don't we paint over there? And we gave it a shot, and it's like, yeah, come do it. And the four of us, myself and the other friends, who later also opened up a gallery space, we painted this mural. And so what we kind of did was we tried to bridge that gap between like graffiti and street art and gallery spaces, because in South Africa there isn't much opportunity for street artists or graffiti artists to exhibit in such spaces, because it's such a big divide, specifically in South Africa, not necessarily the rest of the world. But I thought it was really cool of the Zeitz to give us that opportunity and put up our billboard. But yeah, so how I got into graffiti and street art is when I was much younger. I would drive past a lot of murals and street art on my way to school, and the feeling I got from that was incredible. Like I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was like, that's so creative, and I feel like that's a very big. That's so important. Public art is so important. Not a lot of people realize how much it can affect you. Like it impacted my life. Like it changed my life seeing that, and I wanted to do exactly that, and possibly impact other people in the same way. And so I do focus on a lot of like fun arts and something that would make you smile, or just something more positive than what's in the streets, you know. And also, as South Africans, we're meant to be the Rainbow Nation, and I'm like, how can we be a Rainbow Nation with like dull walls, you know? So yeah, unfortunately, in 2010 there was a bylaw that was passed. It was a graffiti bylaw, and this is one of the struggles we have, where you have to fill out application forms and go through this long process that goes to the Arts and Culture Department, SAPS, law enforcement, to approve a mural before you paint it. And so a lot of murals you see here is not legal. It never went through that channels because it's kind of demotivating. So we just do it anyway. I'll just keep doing it. Yeah, that's me.
Vijay, thank you so much. And I'm going to start actually asking you a couple of questions while we have you here. And I think, firstly, you know, kind of this, what I think about making space, you know, if we think about spatial politics of making space, I think it's extraordinary that you said we opened our own gallery, you know, like, it's also like we're not going to make the work, we're also going to kind of make the space where we're going to show it in. So do you mind telling us a little bit about the gallery as well?
Yeah, sure. So we opened up the gallery in Woodstock at Civic Studios, and Once a month, we would have an exhibition of like an up and coming artist or graffiti artist, mural artist, or group shows. And these are not necessarily artists that show in galleries, but we feel like they have the talent and like the work that could be in galleries. And yeah, the event really hit off. Like it became really cool. We got a big like following and a lot of people interested, and we sold. So yeah, it was awesome.
Fantastic, because I think that's really important, and that I said earlier, like, you know, kind of this making space, but also claiming space in another way. You know, you talk about bylaws when we think about the structures that govern, you know, kind of expression in city. Rika, I think you have some things to say about that specifically, but, you know, so there's layers of bureaucracy that you would encounter in this process of expression, you know, and this kind of levels of control. But tied to me that is what I also have been seeing a little bit is that, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but I also think there's, you know, when it comes to mural art, and I want so many questions in this, but I want to ask if there's a distinction for you between graffiti, you call it mural art, you know, kind of street art, you know, kind of what is the term that you prefer for what you do?
I would say mural arts. So I started off as a graffiti artist, and that was just writing my name everywhere. But I figured that like I could do more, and public art is more impactful than just writing your name. I can give you a perfect example where there's in the Val Street, there's this mural that says everything will be all right, and it's in tiles. And I remember seeing a tweet from someone that had just been robbed, and they were like shaken up, but they walked past this mural and they're like, ah, that's exactly what I needed. Like everything will be okay. And like we're saying that there's so much power in this, like in a public space and having art in a public space. And I kind of went from doing just graffiti to like kind of taking that in and making more of this tool of mural art. So yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you for that distinction. But I want to come back to these layers that you would need to negotiate. Rika, many years ago, we had a conversation about cities in Cape Town, maybe specifically. And I recall you saying something, and I might be paraphrasing, and I hope it was you that said this, that said that for us to kind of like be completely in a post-apartheid state, in a way that we, you know, kind of to eradicate, you know, the inequalities that inscribed in our cities, and that we have to completely rebuild our cities, you know, because what we're dealing with is the infrastructure and the legacies of apartheid. But I feel like this kind of layering that's happening specifically in Cape Town, which is such a kind of where public space is so contested. But maybe we can talk about that a little bit, Rika, about this specific issue of our cities and how we live with what we've been given, so to speak.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Storm. I think we live with this very difficult situation of the spatial divisions being completely cemented into place, and highways being built to really, you know, to kind of keep neighborhoods separate. So a dismantling has to have some kind of spatial form in many ways, because otherwise, how else do you? So I mean, obviously, there's very real economic issues. And you know, there are layers and layers and layers of inequality. But if we're thinking about it in terms of public space and inequalities in public space, there needs to be some kind of you know, grappling with this particular stubborn form of spatial form. But I also wanted to I took a few notes when you were talking, because I do think this the question of graffiti is really interesting in what it reveals. So if you look at the bylaw, it's an incredibly punitive bylaw that essentially criminalizes young Black youth in the city. I mean, that's essentially what it's doing. So unless you get permission, unless you've had your thing signed off, you can either spend 3 months in jail or spend 15,000 Rand to get off. So it's a very particular punitive thing. So, and what is deemed okay is often what is palatable, right? And so, I mean, Bush, you were talking about tagging, but tagging is part of graffiti. It's part of the culture of growing as a graffiti artist. It's a starting point. So if that's criminalized in the very beginning, how does anybody move from that to start developing pieces to you know, producing murals? And then there's this other, I mean, there was this question, I think, Mabel, that you'd brought up around familiarity and like graffiti being a dialogue with the city. And I think for some people, graffiti may be equated to either a very edgy neighborhood like Woodstock, or some kind of crime and grime. But actually, for a lot of people, graffiti is familiar. And so there's a sense of belonging of being in a neighborhood that has graffiti. And so there's this kind of fine line of how graffiti and murals can become sometimes unintentionally a symbol of other things. So it's like one of the things that when I was doing some research around gentrification, and somebody once said that when we saw the murals, we knew our neighborhood was finished, because it was, and I think it was particularly some of the murals as part of I can't remember, at the Baz Arts Festival, that that a neighborhood is about to gentrify when loads of murals are paid for and it kind of creeps out, which is such a bizarre thing, because on the one hand, they really give character to a neighborhood, and it does some of that switching between, switches registered, it kind of blurs the boundaries of neighborhoods, and at the other, at the same time, it can be quite like an uncomfortable tension. I mean, so I think when we have these strange instruments like bylaws, I mean, there's the other public nuisance bylaw, which equates skateboarding with sort of views skateboarding as dangerous as shooting a crossbow in public space. I mean, the logics are kind of bizarre. I mean, they're like, you read some of these things that regulate the cities that we live in, and they're absurd. They're completely absurd in many ways. And so, I mean, I think it's these encroachments like murals and like graffiti that also start populating a city with a different register, cities don't have to look in this tamed world-class city with no people, like the architectural drawings. You know how architectural drawings hardly ever have any people unless they maybe have one white person drinking a coffee outside a building. But there's a sort of something else that's happening when art encroaches on spaces that tells a different story of cities.
Bushy, do you want to respond to that?
I do. I think you're completely right. Like, I think also with people coming into a space, like it feels different when there's murals and there's graffiti. I mean, like, a lot of people travel to places because of street art. Like, that's how important it could be. And I think, like, with the bylaw, where they had it like kind of they got it wrong, because the issue is the gang graffiti, right? So like what the gangsters put up on walls, they put graffiti and mural art on the same level as gang art, which is like, who is monitoring that? Like, how do you differentiate between the two if you're cleaning up that stuff? They didn't. They classified it as the same thing, which is crazy.
Thank you so much for that. And I want, Mabel, do you have I think it was some response from you, if I read correctly. Yes, go for it.
I just wanted to add actually to what Bushy said actually, about the power of art. So when I was working with Woodstock, there's one day I had a really awful day at work. So I just left and took a long walk, like about 11 in Woodstock. And I walked, and I think I was like almost on the brink of tears. And there was this graffiti piece somewhere. There's like also something like everything's gonna be all right on one, just like a small little piece, but just like it felt like it was a sign from somewhere, just like at the right time, and just like how those things are important. And also wanted to say what I also find in Ireland, like Dublin, is that they are trying to embrace it. So I'm not sure if it's gentrification but they are trying to embrace it. So for example, the electric boxes that are on the streets, what they've done is that they've commissioned artists, and they have always calls for artists, and they're all painted, and they've got like different types of art on it. And it's just like different ways in which the city can find to embrace art, to not like see it as gangsters or whatever art, but just like see it as something that's worthwhile, and that actually does make the city more beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mabel. And I want to pose a question to kind of Mabel, maybe to elaborate on a point that you made earlier. Enrica, I think you also touched on this, and this is the place where neighborhoods that might be deemed by some to be dangerous is actually space of freedom and kind of a space of living and being. So I'm curious about those dualities, but of course there's outside perceptions and inside and living inside it, and kind of so how spaces in the city are kind of classified. And maybe if you want to elaborate on this specifically, because I just love what you said about, okay, in the space in Berea, in Joburg, I felt comfortable. This is home, as contested as it might be. And I'm just curious about that notion of living in the city in your experience. And to extend on that question, I assume you did live in Cape Town as well. And if you had any specific experiences of the city in relation to identity, and that you related maybe as you did in Joburg.
Yeah, so I feel like so I've got this weird relationship with Johannesburg that no matter what, it always feels like home for me. Cape Town, and among my so I moved to Cape Town 10 years ago, and all my friends were Black, they all left. Like every single one of them would leave at some point because if they're not from Cape Town, like they get there and they find the place so alienating. And I don't know what it is. It's just like you don't see yourself reflected in the city so there are areas where it's deemed like you can be. When you're in other places, you might get, there's a message in the WhatsApp group, neighborhoods WhatsApp group, that I see a suspicious Bravo male or Bravo female walking, so it's just like the microaggressions. So yeah, so Cape Town is complicated. And also what I find interesting like this, when you talk about the special spaces and just how the people who are from there, yet they feel like they don't belong. At a certain hour, they should all take a taxi or train out of town and just all be gone. And their spaces are the ones that are neglected the most. And people have this excuse like, oh, but these places are clean because of they pay taxes, but everyone pays taxes. So yeah, just find these contested spaces, and especially Cape Town, and power, relations of power, and how we should. I don't know. I don't even know how we rebuild the city. Like, do you have to just break everything down and start from scratch?
That was Rika's suggestion, but she's been chipping away at it, I think, and I think that's also what I feel in these questions. Like coming back to our topic about what's the role of art in this, and making better spaces, and is it art's responsibility to make better spaces, and what is the civic nature of the work that we do? And I want to come back also to you hinted at kind of Mabel about the museum as a public space or a civic space, like this opening up and democratizing and kind of dropping the barriers. But what is the role of art, and what can it really do? Rika, you mentioned it in your presentation as well, your introduction, kind of that art is also a way of like chipping at this or kind of going at it. But can art make a difference in our cities, in the way that we live? I know the answer, and I know it's a kind of obvious one, but I want each one of you just to maybe respond to that.
Okay, I'll start. So I believe art, obviously, I believe art can make a difference. I believe it's got lots of power. And that's why, like in most revolutions, you'll find art is at the center of it. If we look at Growth Must Fall, Fees Must Fall, art was really at the center of all of that. And just about artists being aware of their power, and embracing it and being bold. Like I really like what Bushy said, that they just decided that they're going to go and make their art in the walls of Zeitz MOCAA, like just about occupying these spaces.
Thank you, Mabel. Bushy, your turn.
So yeah, I feel like art needs to be more prominent in townships and in the hoods, like in the Cape Flats. Like I don't think there's enough like opportunity or spaces for people or kids to see art or creative kind of outlets. I feel like a lot of places are neglected in South Africa and in Cape Town, in that like our places over here close to town is like we're in a different bubble over here compared to like townships. Like I get to travel to these places and go into like deep into townships and Cape Flats, and I see like when I'm painting, the kids are like, "Yo, what are you doing?" It blows their mind, and I just feel like, yes, I might be making an impact there, but I feel like uh, the city should be making that impact. The city should be making it like putting in money into infrastructure for the arts, like more of it, because it's a healing factor for like a torn township, or you know what I mean? Yeah.
Absolutely. So there's also like a centralizing that happens in terms of resources and thinking about, even if in public art as well, that it's only serves certain points. And there's some questions building up in the chat that we'll get to that I think is also that's leading to more nuanced conversations about that. But thank you, Bushy, and a poignant point. Rika, your response.
Yeah, maybe I can pick up from what Bushy was saying, is that there's also, that art happens and you're talking about resources and resource flows. I mean, the art is not just one thing. There's a very dominant art market in some ways that will always mimic the formal economy, right? It'll always favor, the same kinds of patterns of the formal economy, but that's not the only thing that art is. And so art may not be able to dismantle the deeply, deeply entrenched structural and systemic inequalities that are global, that are like, kind of very stuck in all sorts of different frames. But what art is really good at is revealing stuff and being able to reveal where these power dynamics that Mabel was talking about, where these power dynamics show, where they get, so they can reveal, they can create platforms for having these kinds of discussions. They can have very, very immediate responses, like you both gave the example of seeing a piece of work and it having some kind of impact, some emotional, affective impact. And I think it does also definitely, and I think this is what this exhibition, Storm, what I kind of imagine what you were trying to do, is to do a bit of this reorienting of not pandering to a particular market, but going kind of really trying to look into what people are doing themselves and what are the practices, not only the art practices, but the kind of what people are doing and holding and keeping for them, the way that art is revealing. So I think, and I think that's where some of the activism that makes a particular kind of announcement versus this, not versus, but at the same time as these other small things that start, what you were saying, Storm, chipping away at and revealing and exposing these massive inequalities.
Thank you, Rika. That's again also very thoughtful, bringing together of some of these key points and coming to the exhibition as an attempt at an act of democracy, or democratic, because we also understand that, or trying to understand, and I think the process of thinking about the institution has been incrementally and also kind of really tasting certain things, and not in a kind of really also experimenting, I guess, but also kind of being very seriously considering what access to the museum means, and kind of like who our constituencies are, and how we address them. And so this is, Mabel, you said this is one way of, this is one act of democratizing, but I think also for us to really think what inclusion means, in spaces like this. But it also leads to what is the museum as a civic space, and what is really public space in the museum. And the museum in some cases cannot be a public space. It's also governed by, kind of external factors on so many levels, but we do and have a responsibility to also open up. And I think it's really good that we, kind of like think about this notion of inclusion a little bit, because I do think whatever, Rika, what you have also described here, and I think it comes through for me with this notion of like what, going through Bushy having to go through this process of getting an official mural in the city, which is essentially kind of also levels of gatekeeping, and kind of like structuring, and how that's kind of systemic and how we challenge that. But certainly Homeless with the Artist has been really this kind of unlearning process for us as well, like I mentioned earlier. And unlearning in the way that we also, I personally as a curator had to suspend so much of my own, kind of notions of what art is. We had to literally embrace everything that was brought to us as precious and special. And that was certainly one of the most extraordinary processes in my career as a curator, and I think also as an institution. It's like, how do we hold dear what's dear to others? My last, because there's a little bit of a ramble from my side as moderator, but I think one of the most beautiful things about this project, as it points to other kind of issues and problems and kind of things that we institutionally have to think about, was one of the intentions was to really understand and also celebrate the impact that art has on lives and how we live with art. Part of it was like thinking through what kept us through early lockdown in South Africa or all over the world. It's like the books and the films and the kind of but also like how do we identify with art objects, and not in the kind of rarefied way of like the international art market way, or the kind of what was maybe the museum way of thinking around objects. But was extraordinary the testimonies, and this is another forum where that art has a real impact on lives, and kind of on lived lives and on daily lives. And a lot of this is just invisible, kind of to others, kind of, so we also have a very close relationship with things that's not necessarily shared with others. And so this exhibition then opens up that process and make it more visible and more, and so I wish we had another 2 years on this exhibition, because we've been delving into these stories and narratives, and there are so many of them. There's like 1,800 stories embedded in the show, and I just wish we had time to get to them all. But I'm completely off topic and I went on a ramble. Mabel, a question to you though, specifically around your kind of the work that you entered. This is also an act of resistance, like the notion of you desecrated an image, kind of you also made a statement about, you inscribed over something else, which I think is a beautiful radical statement. And I think that's also why we kind of like went to that. You talked a little bit about the process, but looking at it now in the context of this exhibition, how do you feel about this work? Have your thoughts about it changed? What do you think?
So my thoughts about it have not changed actually. It's just one of the weird things when I see it and I'm like, oh, I wish we had done it more precisely. Like, I don't know, you can see, but the INAL, you can see it squashed because we're like, oh snap, we're running out of space. Because we are not artists. I mean, like, we're not like, we appreciate it, but not really artists. So when I just look at it, that's the stuff I see. And what I actually want to ask you, Storm, is are you thinking of doing this again, like doing a similar call again? Because to be honest, when I went there with my niece and my nephew and we went through it, I was actually blown away, like with the quality of the work, that you wouldn't even think this is just a call that was not commissioned, or wasn't like seasoned artists' work. Like it was amazing, and there just was so much to take in. So I'm just wondering if this is something that you would consider doing again.
Thank you, Mabel. And just on the question of who is an artist and who's not, like I said, I think I had thoughts about this before the show opened, and I have different thoughts about it now. I think, like, let's be inclusive and also be including yourself in this. And it's clear that you're an artist, so this hesitancy is really interesting for me, but also I think you should embrace it now. You've shown on an exhibition in the museum, so I think you qualify. But the question, and it's actually in the chat as well, about if we're going to do this exhibition again. I'm not sure, to be honest. I don't necessarily know if we can do it again on this scale. And the reason why I'm saying this is that it came from a very specific space and a moment in time. And I don't want to sound like I'm contradicting myself here, but it was after a time of closure we had no other programming. Everything else was suspended for a long time. We had time to plan and think through it in a very particular way. And we had to pull every single human resource. And it was kind of an expensive exhibition to mount as well. But it took really a particular kind of effort to get this through, and energy as well. And it was coming out of this particular moment that's historic. And I don't know if we can replicate that. I don't know if we can redo that, because that lockdown pent up out of that issue into the world again. And I think it took exceptional, kind of efforts from all of us in the institution to put this up. Both from a bureaucratic, kind of process, and both to install the exhibition in the period that we did. And bureaucratically, it's a complex thing. And we're actually planning, kind of as a team, the dismantling of this exhibition, which is a huge process as well, like returning these 1,800 plus artworks to people. But I think there's definitely something that's on our cards. But again, veering a little bit from this conversation. So it's a bit of an inconclusive response, but I think we're also really rethinking about, like, and the question is more for us, is like, what as an institution do we do to continue this process? And it doesn't necessarily need to be an exhibition. I think there's, we also need to explore other options and other possibilities for what it means, kind of on how we handle it. And I hope that makes sense. If that's a reasonable answer. Bushy, there's a couple of questions that's popping up for you. And I think it's specifically around, kind of like a question more specifically, not directly so much at you, from Marco, about, kind of this gentrification, becoming a contributor to or precursor of displacement. It's become a kind of like a warning. Rika has affirmed that to you, but also, I think more specifically, kind of like, how do you see your role as a practitioner? Do you think about your own practice as political in any way? Is it connected to something that you feel is a critical political connection to the city and to others?
So I don't really do much political art anymore. I stay away. And gentrification always, like, the question always pops up: are we as artists contributing to gentrification? Are we contributing to gentrification if we're from the area as well? Like, there's so many layers to that question and answer. I personally don't feel like I contribute, like, completely to gentrification, because there's much more to it than just painting walls. Gentrification isn't just painting walls. It's obviously buildings going up, and I don't feel like street art is the number one, like, reason behind gentrification because of that. It's like people with money. It's people seeing, like, a place close to the city, and, like, I think street art, it just goes everywhere. It, like, paints everywhere. So why isn't, like, all of those other places being gentrified? Like, there's so many ways to think about it, but I do think also it might have a small impact for gentrification. And with that being said, it's like it's inevitable. Even if there's no street art, that area was going to be gentrified anyway.
I mean, it's I
don't know.
Yeah, no, it's hard. It's also like a kind of, this, what he says, inevitable. It hurts, kind of in more ways than one. A last question to all three of you. Sorry, Rika, you wanted to respond?
No, I just wanted to come in. I just wanted to say, completely, it's not the art form's fault in any sense. It's like, gentrification comes from property markets, and, those are controlled by, property deletes. What kind of gets a bit, where I think the tension lies, is that when property kind of developers see the edginess of it and sort of maybe manipulate, in a way, murals as an agent for their vision of a particular neighborhood, because you wouldn't have, you could have another neighborhood that's gentrified completely, that has absolutely no murals, it's not, and so, I totally see it, like, you're just sitting in this weird sort of, the city sitting in these weird contradictions all the time.
Completely, yeah.
Thank you, Rika. Mabel, you want to respond?
Okay, so I'm more to I think a comment. So as someone who studied a Bachelor of Arts, so many people would be asking me why I'm doing an art degree, why not doing accounting, law, the more credible degrees. And so I think during lockdown, people might have sensed the importance of art. I mean, I think, I don't know who said it, but it's what kept us going during lockdown. It was art, it was movies, music, books. But I think people still don't appreciate art. So I think I was thinking about the commodification of art and who finances art. And so now, as soon as art is, as soon as there's a corporate behind art, people have become skeptical. For example, I don't know if you saw, but there's this Cadbury. So Cadbury has this project where they paid writers to write stories, and then they were translating them to other languages. I was part of the South African one, and I was paid. But then the Kenyan one, I don't know what happened or if it is true, but people came out and saying they were, because they're corporate, they're taking people's stories and they're exploiting. So it's like such a complicated thing. And also for you to say that the exhibition was expensive, like I'm just wondering how do we finance the art then without selling out?
You know, this is a vexing question, I think, for all of us, and I think we all make these decisions, you know, kind of daily. You know, I'm also curious about, particularly thinking about Rika's point about the way that art and reveals things as well, and like kind of how we continuously understand and unpack the world. But how we navigate it it's a daily question, I think. Also, institutionally we do this all the time. You know, like, is this a partnership or this is something that speaks to our values, and how do we kind of like engage in a world where kind of there's so many demands on us. As an artist, I know also it's a very hard thing, kind of to navigate how our stories are told and kind of how it's held and respected. But I want to kind of, just as a concluding question to the three of you, ask you for a moment to imagine the city you really want to live in. And so what does the city look like? And just taking from what we've seen, how do we imagine this place? And thinking about utopias maybe a little bit, but because we've kind of spoken about what should, what's wrong with city. So over to you, Rika, you first.
Oh no, it's such a difficult question because we're so used to criticizing and looking for the especially like a lot of urban research is so stuck in problems. But I was just thinking, what does a city feel like? I mean, I think it's a kind of a sensory. It's about what it looks like, but it's also the sense of it. Which includes the kinds of smells and the kinds of sounds that we're hearing. And this erasure of all of that is not ideal. So a utopian city has rich smells of cooking, of life, it has sounds, it is filled with music, it is, it's animated in that way. It's not this quiet city where people phone in with noise complaints. It's something, the like fences are not high, so I imagine that a kind of, a utopian city for me is the total opposite of these architectural design renderings. That it is, they're peopled and they're busy and they are friendly and generous and and have a kind of a sensory scape that is more accommodating than what a lot of urban planning and urban ordering is about. I know that's very vague.
No, that's really great as well, and I can smell and picture it. Bushy, over to you.
Rika, I really loved what you just said. I think if there's good food, good music, good art, and good people, that would make a good city. So completely. I've only ever been to like a handful of cities in the world, and I feel like the ones that really stood out to me were like Bangkok, because everything ran like really well and there was good culture and like people were cool. So yeah, like Rika said, good food, good music, good art system, and if things ran properly, like the metro rail, that would be a good city. Yes.
No
Very difficult
bylaws,
question, by the way.
and maybe no bylaws for mural artists, right?
Exactly.
Mabel, over to you.
Yeah, so it's a tough question also because I've imagined dystopian cities, but utopias. But I think I agree with everyone else. Like, and also I feel like a city that is rooted in the community in the past also, I really like the idea of museums or galleries that living museums, let me say, where which have include the people who stay there. Yeah, and just one that celebrates art and where people feel safe. So it's very important for me, safety.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate this, and echo you on these desires, and kind of also curious about how we make beautiful cities in imperfect places as well. There's one more question here that it's specifically to Bushy Wopp, but I want to invite our audience to please, if there's any more further questions, just drop them into the Q&A section, and we'll address it. But yeah, Bushy Wopp, the city of Cape Town specifically buffs political street art and leaves certain pieces, especially those that are more aesthetically pleasing, longer. They faster to also buff in more affluent places, areas. This is an example of further entrenching political and physical divides. What are some examples of this you've seen and your thoughts on this?
Absolutely. The most recent one that I've seen was a mural in Woodstock where it was Free Palestine, and among the Free Palestine mural were like numerous other murals, and the buff came to cover that up. They just covered the Free Palestine, and I feel like that's a bit problematic in terms of free speech and what we put out there as artists. And I don't understand why that was covered specifically, but it does happen a lot. And I think somebody complained that was the only mural that got covered, and then they covered everything. But yeah, it is exactly like that. And yeah, I think Cape Town, we still have a far way to go in terms of where we are in our public art spaces. And yeah, I think it is what it is right now. We have yet to fight that battle.
Sorry, and just clarify, thank you for that. The buff means, I guess, somebody comes to paint it out, right? The buff.
Yeah, sorry.
It sounds
Buff
like
means,
a person called the buff, yeah.
Yeah, buffing means covering up the paint with just one color.
Okay. Well, yeah, no, that is these acts of erasure, and also the levels that creativity is governed and controlled by others. I don't know if anybody has a concluding statement to make. What do you think about that? Yes, Rika.
I don't have a statement, but I've got a question for for Mabel and for Bushy, because there was something that came up earlier around the and I think like art and archives, and what it would mean to think of museums as not indoors, and what is the kind of urban archive, like what would an urban art archive look like that's in the streets as opposed to, and like what is the bleed between the inside and the outside? Because Bushy, you were talking about like this relationship between the inside of the gallery and the city walls. So I'm just really curious about what people think about this notion of archive and space, and yeah.
I do know that there are certain like spaces in the city and around the city that are just for graffiti. Specifically, like in Woodstock, there's a park called Soul Street, and that park for over like a decade or more has been filled with graffiti, and people come and paint over it. So your paint will last for like 2 weeks or like a year, but it's always been filled, and that's kind of been like the wall of fame for graffiti artists over these last like couple of years and more. So that for me is like the only kind of archive. Other than that, like street art and graffiti, they're meant to renew itself. Like you're meant to go over it and like paint something new. That's just the nature of street art. It's it should exist on pictures and then like move on, you know.
Yeah, I agree with that, Rika. Also, like it's probably a living archive. I'm like probably in digital. That's where it's going to live. Also, I just want to share one of my favorite pieces. I can't remember who did it, but he took a door that was found, like I think in a school toilet or something, and then he stripped it, and there were layers to it, and that's how he does his art, just based on these doors, and there are layers because of all the paint that has been applied and people painting over whatever, and that is like a way of archiving. So I'm imagining one day if there's some technology that's able to break through all the paint and you can imagine all the layers of graffiti that you see underneath, maybe.
That's such a beautiful image.
And I also think about all these layers of things that's been painted over and over and buffed out, you know, like the kind of things that becomes invisible. I'm also thinking about maybe to think about this as the way we think about living in clothes, you know, like that there's a certain something that started happening with the things that you love and wear. Maybe our walls become like that too a little bit, where this is these imprints and layers of things before us. I'm often thinking about exhibitions in a way as that part of that archive too. And exhibitions is kind of performative. It's like music. It has a beginning and an end, and then it's kind of like gone, and it's completely, you can only experience in person and with your body. And so, but then it disappears, and then it's a representation, you know, it's a picture of something that has a very different relationship to it. And maybe street art has a similar thing to it, that it is like this time-based thing. But that is, Rika, I love your question is quite evocative about the archive. Then that becomes almost intangible, you know, and that's something that we know then leads to maybe something for another conversation, which is the spirit of place, genus loci, which is something I return to often, to think about how spaces become redolent with what's gone before, either the lived bodies or maybe in this case also artworks. And whilst we might not necessarily see it, that we could sense it and kind of have different kinds of like experiences of the city and urban areas. So yeah, I think there's a question for me, I guess, here about making museums more accessible for people who live there, or making it feel less intimidating. What would that look like to you? Looking at a space like Zeitz, I myself feel intimidated when walking in there, but no idea what I expect to feel or see in a space like that to make me feel more at home. Yes, I think part of the work, or a lot of the work that we're doing, is exactly to get people across the threshold, so to speak, you know. And once you're inside, then the space is easier to navigate. But I also know that we are navigating imposing architecture and grandiose spaces and all of that, and that those are intimidating. But we are really kind of thinking about ways that we make it more accessible. And Home is Where the Artist is one of those ways. We felt that if people also have something in the building, then that is more home, you know, that is your space too. And that we connect to it. But there's still a kind of unanswered question really of like how we also seem more inviting. So it's also like, do we look inviting or do we seem inviting? And I wanted to think that we have made huge efforts over the last 2 years to be accessible, to be open, and to be approachable, and to approach our projects with a humility as well. So whoever posed this question, please come through, drop us a note. We would love to have you at the museum. I don't know if anybody else wanted to respond to how we become more open or welcoming.
Maybe some graffiti on the building, eh?
Only on the inside, not on the outside. Wow, I walked straight to that one, don't I?
Yeah, on the outside, what? You don't want to mess up the architectural renderings of the
yeah.
Wow, I think we invited this one right in. But yeah, I don't know if any more questions or comments from you guys, but I just again want to thank you so much for your generosity and engagement. I look forward to further conversations with you. The door's open. Very excited about each of your journeys. Thank you for sharing that, and looking forward to further engagements. I just want to also, from my side, thank Tiffany Andrews, who's been facilitating behind the scenes for us. Also to my colleagues, Tandazani Tlakama, one of our curatorial team, and Beata America, who's been really fantastic and kind of supporting to get us to this point. And also to invite you all to come to the museum for this exhibition. It ends on the 31st of October. We have some special events and things planned. Specifically around the show, there's a publication in the pipeline. A very amazing online kind of version of the exhibition is being developed as well. So it lives into the future as well with Google Arts and Culture. So I think we have some exciting things to look forward to. But thank you, Rika, and thank you, Bushy, and thank you, Mabel, for giving so generously tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much for everyone also who joined in.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. Really honored.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Go well.
Ciao, ciao.